Oh, it's totally incredible. I mean, just that starting point of Paul Morgan-Bentley applying for the job in his own name, didn't even try and hide who he was, and managing to get in there within a few weeks. And the things he found out during his investigation in there, he found out that a couple of years ago there was a prisoner who managed to escape because they just hadn't locked the doors. And rather than having some cunning plan where he'd have to go through some air conditioning unit and up some vents or something like that, he just walked through a series of unlocked doors, then managed to pick up a bicycle from the prison maintenance department, and then just cycled up the street.
A couple of thoughts. Now, shall we now talk about the state of the country? Now, you may have seen the Times. You saw the Times, the remarkable story there. It's an exclusive story from an undercover reporter on the Times, and it's led to, well, the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, he's ordered, among other things, an urgent investigation now into the way prisons are working, the way that prison contractors who work in those jails are vetted. And now the journalist who was hired to work in HM Prison Bedford, he walked inside. He was able to walk inside to interact with prisoners, and there were no security searches, or he did it without security searches. And I spoke to him, Paul Morgan-Bentley, a little earlier on Drive. He's the head of investigations at the Times, who was, of course, behind this story.
Bedford Prison is a prison that has had a damning inspection report, and we know has been run very badly. And there were these jobs going there as what was advertised as a prison escort, in brackets OSG.
What is their job in a nutshell? What do they do?
So they typically don't have as much interaction with prisoners. So they'll do things like searches at the front gate or searches of vehicles coming into the prison. They'll be looking at CCTV. And then the contractor job I was doing involved escorting builders that were working on the prison. So Bedford's a Victorian, very old prison, crumbling prison, and there's a lot of building work going on, which has its own huge security risk because they have dangerous tools on them. And these, what are called OSG escorts or prison escorts, are there with the keys to move them around to the prison anywhere they need to go to do their work.
Right, so even within the rules, if everything was being done by the book, you've still got quite a lot of access. And so you need to choose carefully who gets this job. What was your vetting like? How thorough was it or not?
Well, you'd think so. Turned out I applied, and within 3 weeks I was in the prison. And I had to give some documents, but there was no thorough checks on my employment history, because clearly that would have found that I'm a journalist at the Times who does undercover work.
Wouldn't have taken a lot, would it? Just a Google, and that would be it.
They clearly didn't Google me. I mean, it's astonishing.
So Paul Morgan-Bentley there, the head of investigations at the Times, who got into Bedford Prison working in there as a contracted worker. It took days. They didn't even Google him, look into his background. They would have seen he is the head of investigations at the Times. And when he got in there, he was able to walk through on occasion, through the gate, just walk through. The metal detectors were beeping away. Didn't matter. Nobody was there manning the detectors. He could have been carrying a firearm, a knife. He could have been carrying drugs, any kind of contraband. Just strolled in there, and he mixed with prisoners. He could have been handing over that contraband, and on and on it went in that way. Now, the Ministry of Justice said agency workers had an abridged vetting process, and directly employed OSG roles, that was his role, had more training than normal prison staff vetting. It said it now is seeking urgent clarification on whether the contractor vetting used nationwide was appropriate. I spoke then to Mike Fairhurst. He's the chair of the Prison Officers Association, and he gave me this reaction.
We've got examples of people going for an interview for an OSG position, failing the interview because they're not suitable for the post, then going away, applying for a prison officer job online and getting the job as a prison officer because you don't have a face-to-face interview with the governor of the jail you're going to be working in to become a prison officer. We've highlighted that to them. We've highlighted that they've let slip people with criminal records. We had one guy who got a custodial sentence who was a far-right sympathiser, and it was all over his social media posts, but they failed to pick that up. So I'm glad this has been exposed, because it's not just the POA going on about it now. It's actually undercover journalists who've exposed everything we've been saying for the past couple of years.
So Kate and John, there's the chair of the Prison Officers Association saying this sort of thing has been known to prison officers and the association for years, and they've been warning the Justice Department about it. They haven't gone public, says Mike Fairhurst, because they feared reprisals. They feared senior levels of the Ministry of Justice or prison service coming down on them for doing that. And now this investigation of the time just shows what's been going on for some time. What a sorry story about the state of our prisons.
Oh, it's totally incredible. I mean, just that starting point of Paul Morgan-Bentley applying for the job in his own name, didn't even try and hide who he was, and managing to get in there within a few weeks. And the things he found out during his investigation in there, he found out that a couple of years ago there was a prisoner who managed to escape because they just hadn't locked the doors. And rather than having some cunning plan where he'd had to go through some air conditioning unit and up some vents or something like that, he just walked through a series of unlocked doors, then managed to pick up a bicycle from the prison maintenance department, and then just cycled up the street. It just feels like it's totally made up, but it's not. It is real. And if we're going to look at it from the political angle, you know, the Tories for a long time have traded on being the party of law and justice. We know they would love to attack the Labour Party in this election, saying, well, they are soft and justice. And that argument is much more difficult to make when you've got examples like this in the public.
The only amazing thing about this, well, it's all amazing, but the truly amazing thing maybe, Kate, is that we don't see many, many more breakouts.
I know, because as John just pointed out there, it's farcical. It's farcical, just the sheer lack of checks to let people get in. But there you just hear what they found out and how easy it is to just walk out. You're reminded in the story, aren't you? I think I was on your show at the time, John, and was it about 6 months ago or a year ago when the prisoner escaped from Wandsworth, that was it, under the bottom of the lorry. And at the time we were all kind of deeply shocked, but when you hear exposés like this one in the Times, you think, how does that not happen more often? I think the reality is that the state of our prisons are appalling. There are hardly, they are bursting at the seams. I think there's something like 300 spare places nationally at the moment. They're full. The government's having to release prisoners a bit early, or some prisoners early, to clear space. Rehabilitation is often so difficult. You're just kind of managing these people, self-harm, out of control, drugs in prison. They are obviously in an appalling state.
I'm advised that we are 500 places short of actually being full up, of the prisons being literally, actually full up. I mean, it brings to mind the phrase, the theme, broken Britain. Just another example.
Yeah, and I don't think we quite know the real scale of what's happening with releasing prisoners early. We know that Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, announced a couple of weeks ago that they were going to start releasing some prisoners 2 months early in order to reduce the number of people who were in jail to free up some extra spaces. But what we haven't learned is how many people have been released early and what sort of criminals are being released early. We haven't had any information on, are these shoplifters, are these domestic violence offenders, are these burglars? We haven't had anything like that so far. And at some point, the government is going to have to release that information. And I think there'll be uproar from the public when they start to hear the sorts of people who are being released early.